We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
Hey Ed, this is Jason Van Tatenhove and Jim White. You're live on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
Ed, let me give you a proper introduction. Joining us on the line is J. Edward Griffin. He's an American author, lecturer, and filmmaker, perhaps best known as the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is about the Federal Reserve System. He's also known for advocating the cancer metabolic disease and be cured by consuming more. Let's see, I'm losing it here. Okay. And you are the president and founder of Freedom Force International, I believe. J. Edward Griffin, thanks for joining us today on the Liberty Brothers.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me.
You're quite welcome. I have to say, first of all, your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which I just alluded to, fantastic. The best book on the Federal Reserve ever written, perhaps one of the better books ever written. Tell us a little bit about it, if you can, starting off, because I know that's really where you could speak about many things. I know cancer. I think you're friends with the mutual friend of ours, Ty Bollinger. But if you can, talk a little bit about the Fed and what made you write that book, because it's just it's a fantastic book, Edward.
Well, thank you for that, Jason. I'd be happy to talk about it. It's one of my favorite topics. The problem is that there's so much to cover, and once I get started, once I get wound up, who knows where this will go. So how much time do you want me to devote to this topic? Should I condense this down to a soundbite or a 3-minute segment or an hour, or what do you have in mind?
Well, basically, a background on the Fed and how they're not really even really a federal agency. And I know there's so much information. The book it's filled and packed filled. Give us the Cliff Notes if you can, Ed.
Yeah, okay. I'll get it right down to the highlights. The Federal Reserve System. All right. Well, I think the main thing to know about the Fed is that it's not what it appears to be. Most people, including myself not too long ago, most people think that the Federal Reserve is an agency of the federal government. Well, it isn't. It turns out that it's not connected with the government. It's certainly not controlled by the government. In fact, it's more the other way around. It has become so powerful in its ability to control the money supply that many people, including myself, are looking at the Fed as the director of the government rather than the government being the director of the Fed. So what is the Fed? Well, the short answer is it's a cartel. It's no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. It just happens to be a banking cartel, which means it's composed of the large banks of the United States. It's like a trade association in a way. And they've come together and formed this thing called the Federal Reserve System. They incorporated it. They got Congress to issue a charter to it. They drafted legislation that was called the Federal Reserve Act, which has been amended many, many times since the beginning, which was way back in 1913. And in essence, what we're dealing with is a private cartel that has been given the power to issue the nation's money in the name of the nation. Most people would think that the country, the nation itself, issues its own money. And that's what we think about the American dollar, but it isn't true. With the formation of the Federal Reserve and the drafting of the Federal Reserve Act and voted on and accepted by Congress and the Senate, what the government did is assign its right to issue money to the private banking industry. And it's an amazing accomplishment when you think about it, because they were able to do this in plain sight And yet nobody picked up on it because I guess most people, like, as I said, myself included a little while ago, we just felt that it was just too complicated. It was not for us to understand. We're sure that it's all in good hands because, after all, Congress approved it, and we elect our congressmen, and they're obedient to our wishes, and they're out there to protect us and so forth. We just assumed that, hey, everything is fine. But when you just think about it, we gave the private banks in America and their cartel the power to issue the United States currency. And when I say the power to issue it, they have absolute power over it. It's true that the currency is still printed by the printing office under the direction of the Treasury Department, and that is a government agency. But the Treasury doesn't determine when to print or how much to print or what denominations to print. They take orders from the Federal Reserve. In other words, the printing office under the Treasury Department is merely a printing company. They contract with the Federal Reserve, which is actually the issuer of the nation's money. And they issue the money as they see fit. Congress has no ability to tell them anything. They're completely independent. They do go to Congress from now and then and issue reports, rather veiled reports. You don't really learn too much from them. It always sounds very good. But when Congress says, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? They say, well, we'll consider it. It's their decision. So I go back to the central concept of understanding the Fed is that here it is that a private banking industry formed a cartel among themselves, got these idiots in Congress to take their cartel agreement between themselves and pass it into law, so that now you and I and everybody in the country must abide by the terms of the cartel agreement in relation to money. And if we don't, we go to prison, because all of this was passed into law, which is the reason that most people think that the Federal Reserve is a government agency, because it has the power of law behind it. But that is not its own power. It's the power that Congress gave it. So there you have it in a nutshell. It doesn't sound like a very healthy thing for the American people, and it certainly isn't, because with that power in the hands of the banks, they have been able to legally plunder the American people ever since the Federal Reserve's formation back in 1913. And they plunder the people through various ways, but the most obvious way is by the issuance and the creation of money. And they create this money out of nothing. They don't have to have anything behind it except an IOU, a promise to pay, literally out of nothing. There's nothing tangible behind it in most cases. It's not like they have gold or silver, or sometimes they have collateral. Sometimes if you want to take a loan out from the bank, you might have to put up your house as collateral. You might have to put up your farm and your tractor and so forth. That's secured loans, and so that becomes the backing for the money. But all the credit card money and all the loans at the bank generally are uncollateralized, meaning they just create it out of nothing, and then they collect interest on that nothing. So you can imagine what tremendous leverage that gives banks to collect interest on nothing. It's a great scam. One of the greatest scams of all history is right under our noses, and that's the reason I wrote my book.
Ed, if you could recount, I heard you recount, I think, one time on an interview or perhaps a YouTube video about and I believe, if I remember correctly, on Jekyll Island, and the house that they actually created that agreement was over some sort of a burial site or some sort of a esoteric type of worship site or something of that nature. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I've heard that story. I have never seen any confirmation of it. I don't know whether it's true or not. I really don't think it's awfully significant. If it is true, it'd be a weird little footnote of history, and it might indicate, the quirks in the minds of some of these people that built that place. But I'm not sure it's true. The greater crime, as far as I'm concerned, is this legalized plunder of the American people, not whether or not it's over some ancient burial site.
No, I agree. And, the reason I had brought that up is because the way that they have a stranglehold on the public, and they're really killing this country. They have to come from somewhere else, it seems sometimes, Ed. I mean, these people don't seem to be really part of the human species, because they They plunder and they profit on the misery and bad timing of the population. And
Well, yeah, that's true. But however, I do think, unfortunately, I believe that probably there's about 15% of the human population, somewhere in that range, that just is born with that predator gene. I mean, there are about 12, 15% of the people that are just basically predators. They have no qualms about stealing, about manipulating, about enslaving, deceiving, cheating other human beings. This is the way they're apparently the way they're born. Well, naturally, people like that are looking for positions in life where they can do this, where they can be predators. Well, the first line in that pursuit, if you wanted to take on that field as a career, you might say, well, you'd go into crime, you'd become a criminal, you'd steal and cheat, and so forth. You'd become a criminal. But so much better if you could go into government or into banking, where you can cheat and steal legally. And not only that, but be praised for doing it and ride around in limousines and be part of the judicial system that sends other people to jail. So when you have government and banking so powerful as they are today, they become centers of power, and those centers of power become magnets to the predator class in society. And you find that predator class, I believe, everywhere in the world and throughout history. It's not just today.
Well, Edward, let me ask you this. This is just Jason. Thanks for coming on the show. And by the way, it is an honor to talk with you. You're one of the influential people that helped wake me up to the truth of things, and certainly appreciate your work. One thing that seems to almost resonate with is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the whole new smart meter push out. This is something that had been invested billions of dollars into as a stimulus. It started out as a smaller one and it got much bigger. There are very huge corporations that are pushing these, and people really don't have a choice to be putting to use them or not. They're being put on every household in America, and they're showing very serious health ramifications that are happening. But just the fact that there is no choice, it is simply being perpetrated upon us, not only here in America, but across the globe we're seeing it. I was wondering if we might be able to get if you are knowledgeable in it, your thoughts on what's happening with these smart meters and the push on it and the suppression of the dangers and whatnot. Do you have an opinion on that at all?
Oh, I definitely have an opinion on it. It's not my strong area of research, but I have studied it. I've read everything I could find on it, and I've listened to the arguments pro and con in this debate from the very beginning. And yes, I do have very strong convictions on it. You've mentioned the highlights of it just a moment ago. But in addition to not having any choice, it makes you wonder, why are they doing this? Why is this being rolled out at tremendous expense? It's not saving money for the utility companies at all, although that is offered to the gum-chewing public as being the rationale for it. Like, isn't it so much better to read your meters electronically and save the cost of having to send somebody around and read your meters and be bitten by the dog and all that sort of thing? That's the argument. That's as deep as they want you to think. But in reality, the whole program is really costing them a lot of money to install it. The meters don't last as long as the old ones do. They have to be replaced. They're delivering false readings. There's a lot of accounting having to go on to adjust people's bills. There are lawsuits coming online. It's actually costing the utility companies a lot of money to institute this program, but they proceed anyway, partly because they're being funded by federal grants to do so. But it makes you wonder, why are they doing this? And you don't have to dig very far to realize that there are other things going on other than just trying to save money and reading your meter. And once you get into that field, you realize that the people who have designed this are looking down the line into the future, where they want to have control over not only your electrical consumption in your home, to take that option away from you. They want to have control as to how much electricity you can use at certain hours of the day. Eventually, they want to determine where that electricity goes in your home. Will it go to your refrigerator? Okay, maybe that. Will it go to your air conditioner? No, we'll turn that off. You're not entitled to air conditioning unless you're part of the political elite, of course. They want to control what appliances you use, what hours you use those appliances, and then they want to monitor how much you're using. They want to know what your carbon footprint is so they can fine you and they can raise revenue in that way. They want to know, when you're gone, how long you've been gone. They can tell if your lights are not going on and off, probably you're not in your house. This person is not there. Where are they? Well, now that ties over to another database. They're putting computers into your cars, or that's what they want to do, and they're in the process now. They want to know where you went, when you went, how fast you drove, when you got there, when you turned your engine off, how long you stayed. In other words, this is all part of a much more sinister program in which the government, I guess we'll just use that word for now, people in the government want to track your every movement. They want to monitor where you are, where you've been, what you're buying, what you're eating, what you're thinking, because they want to control every aspect of your life. And that's the thing that is alarming to me, and not just me, to a lot of people. Anybody that looks at this topic has to realize from the very get-go that the issues are much deeper than just reading your electrical consumption.
Well, it really seems they're putting in place a worldwide control grid. That really the end game is to control us and to keep us sick, to keep us poor. It seems to be the powers that be really do not like this notion of the middle class that we've created with this 200-year-old experiment that we have here called America, and the rights that came along with it. And they've been planning for a long time to get rid of it. Do you think it's part of that? It sure seems like it's a multi-pronged attack from the processed foods, the chemicals in the air, chemicals in the water. We're just getting hit on all sides. It's almost as if they want us enslaved and almost dead.
Well, yeah, I find it hard to disagree with anything you said. I do know that they certainly want to reduce the population by a huge quantity, probably 80 to 90%. They have somehow, in their infinite wisdom, determined that the human population is too large, so it has to be thinned out. They will not be on the list of thinning, however, because after all, we do need benevolent and smart, wise people like them to make these decisions, and so they're always on the exception list. That's how they think. And we see this going on. I must say on that topic, before I get off of it, however, that many people believe, because they know that what I just said is true, they believe that, these people want to exterminate us. I'm not convinced of that, although I think they'd be willing to do that if necessary. I think their major plan is to reduce the population primarily through reproductive rates. In other words, to sterilize or almost sterilize the population, to reduce reproductive rates so that we reproduce less rapidly. Well, anyway, it's a can of worms, and the whole thing boils down to the fact that these people think that they're God. They are the social engineers. They want to change everything about human existence to their liking, and that doesn't sit well with me at all.
Ed, moving on to international finance, you see Europe starting to crack in some instances. You see certain countries now that are sort of trying to reject the bankers, and you've always got that wild card of Russia. What's your thoughts? We've asked a couple of guests that have been on here that have knowledge of international finance like yourself. What do you think about Putin overall? I mean, do you think the guy is a villain, or do you think the guy really is trying to stand up against the bankers, or is he part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution?
There are no excuse me, I got that wrong. There are no good guys out there in the world as far as world leaders are concerned. They oppose each other. because they're fighting each other for dominance. They want to be at the top of the heap. They want to be the masters, the rulers of the universe. And so guys like Putin will fight guys like Obama. The leaders of Venezuela will fight the leaders of Western Europe. At least ideologically, if necessary, maybe in physical battle. Just like Stalin fought Hitler. Now, okay, there's a perfect example. Who was the good guy in the war between Stalin and Hitler? There are no good guys. In fact, they were so similar, it was pathetic. They were fighting not over ideology, because they both believed exactly the same thing. The only thing they were fighting over was who was going to be the top dog, who would have the power. And that's what we see today on the world stage. We think that because the Russians and the Chinese perhaps are exposing and opposing the shenanigans of American bankers, we think, these guys are good guys because look, they're exposing people who are hurting us. They got to be good guys. Don't think it for a minute. Right now, China is saying we got to get on the gold standard. We have to get out of this controlled gold market of London. And we're all saying, yeah, hooray, hooray. But what do they want to do? They want to create their own gold market and control their own market and have that control over the price so they can do exactly what London is doing. They don't want to break the monopoly. They just want to have their own monopoly. And we have people like this all over the world. They oppose each other because they want what the other guy has got, not because they're opposed ideologically. And we got to get that clear, because if we start thinking that a guy like Putin is our friend or a good guy, we've made a huge mistake.
Let me ask you this, Edward. You kind of were the first to expose the Federal Reserve not being a federal entity and laying things out. I remember a time when I myself believed they were a federal entity, and most people did. It seems to me that people are beginning to wake up more and more. We're seeing, a lot more alternative media talking about these sorts of things. Do you think it's because things are getting worse that more and more people are waking up, or is there just more information out there?
Well, actually, I think it's both in combination. When I started down this track, the book was published in 1994. There was very little information out there about the Federal Reserve. It was not a topic of discussion. It was not a political debate. It was just a non-topic. Well, now everybody's talking about it. It's not just because of my book, which had something to do with it, I'm sure, because we put out more than 500,000 copies of this book, which is amazing to me because it's a huge book. It's 600 pages. I thought nobody's going to read this thing, but actually over 500,000 people have, and we have a lecture that I've made on this topic, which is sort of an introduction to it, not a bad summary, and I know that CD has been pirated. At our endorsement, by the way, we ask people to make copies of it and send it around, and we estimate that probably a couple of million copies of that has been put into circulation. So there are millions of people that are getting this message, and then through talk shows like this one, and so the topic is out there. And then when Ron Paul ran for president a couple of times, he brought the topic of the Federal Reserve right to the top of the deck, and it became a conversation, a debate point. So all of this indicates that the information now is getting out there, but certainly people are motivated to take an interest in that information because the economy is really vibrating badly, and people can tell something bad is probably going to happen, and they should be worried about it.
You know what? I have your book on vitamin B17, and I know that you are very astute when it comes to health matters. And as I said previously, I think you work closely with one of our friends of the show here, Ty Bollinger. Ty's a great guy. We see the, you've seen, I'm sure lately, you've seen the whole push to forcibly vaccinate people because of measles. Apparently, the people that are not vaccinated are giving the people that are vaccinated measles. How that makes sense to me, I just don't know. But that's the story they're trying to push anyway. What can you comment about the stranglehold that the pharmaceutical industry has on the American public and on medicine? I mean, isn't it really, Ed, isn't it really in their best interest to continue to keep people sick? I mean, that's how they make profits, right? They don't make profits when people are well.
Absolutely. And we're talking about another cartel. The reality is that we live in an age of cartels. We originally talked about the Federal Reserve as a banking cartel. Well, we have a health industry cartel that is humongous. It's huge. I'm not sure it's quite as powerful as the banking cartel, but it's very close to it. Because, what is health? I mean, money is nothing if you're sick. People will spend every last dollar they have to be well again. So anybody that can control the flow of health information and health therapy is in a very powerful position in the world. That spot is held by the pharmaceutical industry. They worked hard to get there. They started that, incidentally, just about the same time as the banking cartel went together. We're talking about 1910 through 1913. The investors, the owners of some of the larger, pharmaceutical companies began to spend quite a bit of money to influence medical education, not just in America, but around the world. I'm more familiar with the story in America. It was done primarily by the Rockefeller and Carnegie funds. They put up the money, and they financed Abraham Flexner, who was the author of the famous Flexner Report back in, I think it was 1913 or 1910 to 13. And, that, hey, medical education in America is in a sad state. Look at all these quacks that are coming out. You can get a diploma through the mail and call yourself a doctor. We need reform. And everybody said, yes, that's true. And so they put up quite a bit of money to reform the universities and to make the certification of medical practitioners more meaningful. And everybody was happy. And these guys were such humanitarians to put up that money. But what they didn't realize is that along with the money came controls. And the controls converted all of the surviving medical institutions, the great teaching institutions that we know of today, it converted them into sales forces for pharmaceutical drugs. The average doctor today is a very smart guy. You just don't get through medical school by being a dummy. But he goes through this intensive training and he comes out the other end knowing everything there is to know about drugs. He's a chemist. And no matter what you have today when you go to see your doctor, I don't care if it's a headache or a hangnail or cancer, anything in between, you're going to walk out of there with a prescription for a drug, because that's what the whole industry has been oriented to do. Now, that results not only in a very questionable status regarding treating diseases, because in my view, and in the view of many professionals in the health field, artificial drugs are not the best approach to treating diseases. In fact, they create conditions. They tend to mask symptoms, but they create serious health conditions underneath the masking of the symptoms of the old condition. And as you just said, the purpose is not to cure diseases, but, well, they call it maintenance. There was a very interesting talk by a lady that used to be a pharmaceutical rep for one of the large drug companies. I saw it on the internet a little while ago. She says, we were told in our classes when we were being trained how to sell these drugs to the doctors is not to cure diseases, but to maintain the disease so that people could live and operate. They never get rid of the disease, but they have to keep taking this drug every day, every week for the rest of their lives, because that means cash flow. That is what you call job security for the pharmaceutical industry. So anyway, it all comes back to the fact that we have a cartel again that's been given legal jurisdiction over the health industry. If you and I say, well, we don't want to take these drugs, we want to try something from nature, for example, maybe we want to eat an apricot seed because we believe that there's something in there from nature that is a natural control for cancer. We might be right, we might be wrong, but anyway, the government says, no, you can't do that because we have a law in place now that says you must use radiation, you must use chemotherapy, or you must use surgery, and anything else is legally defined as quackery, and anybody that tries to use anything else goes to prison. Thank you. So there you have it again. It's the old idea of cartels capturing control of the government, capturing control of our own institution passing laws that make it legally enforceable, that we must follow the rules and directions of the cartel. This is a situation that shows up over and over and over again, no matter where we look in society.
Ed, it sure seems a lot of this is tied to it, almost the keystone to the global takeover of this control system seems to be Agenda 21 with the United Nations and these private-public partnerships that are happening and the treaties that they're putting in. Do you feel that that's a big part of what's happening there? What are your thoughts on Agenda 21?
That's a huge part of what's happening there. Agenda 21, for those who might not recognize the name, is the title given to a project created at the United Nations some years ago. And Agenda 21, let's cut right to the chase. Let's strip away all the nice, sweet-sounding words and get down to its essence. Agenda 21 is a blueprint for converting the world into a collectivist system, a collectivist totalitarian system, and doing so in the name of the environment. Doing so in a way that the average person will say, gosh, I hate what's happening to my life. I hate these controls. I hate these taxes, but I guess it's necessary in order to save the planet from pollution, global warming, and human extinction. In a nutshell, that's what Agenda 21 is all about. It's a program for getting rid of property rights and all other human rights in the name of saving the world to preserve the environment.
This is true. Agenda 21 is it's sort of the framework. We describe it as sort of the framework that's everything else is built upon. Is that you and Agenda 21? Talk a little bit, if you can, about your organization, Freedom Force. I know there's some friends of mine that are actually members. They said that as soon as they found out what you were doing, they signed up right away. And I'm actually going to look into it as well. Tell us a little bit about Freedom Force, if you don't mind, Edward.
Oh, I'd be happy to. In fact, that's where my life is right now because, we talk about all these problems as we have been doing here. We come to the point where we think, well, so what? If we can't do anything about it, why are we wasting our time complaining and whining about it? Unless we can change things, unless we can bring about true reform, we're just wasting our time. And so Freedom Force International is a group of people around the world, as it suggests, international. We have members in, I think it's 56 countries right now, because these problems we're talking about are everywhere. Everybody's facing them to one degree or another in whatever country they live in. And the whole idea is that we have a plan to do something about it. And to describe what that plan is would take quite a while, but it's not so complicated in essence. In essence, it is that we must, first of all, recognize why this is happening around the world. Why is it happening all pretty much the same? And the answer is because there's a common denominator to it. And the common denominator is called collectivism. It's a word which is unfamiliar to most people, but it's really the underlying ideology behind all of these isms that we hate. All of these isms that we have sometimes even fought wars to oppose: fascism, communism, Nazism, socialism, New Dealism, liberalism, left-wingism, neoconservatism. All these isms, neo-Marxism. We got this, all these things. What do they mean? Well, most people don't know what they mean. It's just sort of an emotional response to what the word they think it implies. Either people are good guys or bad guys or something like that, or stupid or greedy, something. But they have emotional responses. They don't really know what the words mean. In truth, once you peel off the labels of most of those concepts, you find that they're all exactly the same underneath. And that essence that is common to them all is called collectivism. The idea that the group is more important than the individual, that rights come from the state, that coercion must be used on people to make them do the right thing. And there are about 8 or 9 different ways in which you can identify the difference between collectivism, which is what we're talking about, and the opposite of collectivism, which is another word that's unfamiliar to people, called individualism. Collectivism and individualism are the exact opposites on on every major issue. So the first thing we do at Freedom Force is to get clear as to what the enemy is. It's not socialism, communism, fascism, Nazism, left wing, right wing, or whatever these things are. It is collectivism. And having done that, we think it's important to know what we want in a proper world, not just what we don't want. It's easy for everybody to say, oh, I don't like this guy. I don't like this policy. I don't like what's happening in the world. But ask them how they would make it better. Their idea generally is, well, we just get rid of the bad guys. If we get rid of the bad guys, well, then somehow good guys will step into their place. Well, as I mentioned earlier, as long as that power exists, that corporate power or that banking power or that power of government, as long as it is a powerful centralized source, it will be a magnet to all the predator class. So getting rid of one predator won't help because the magnet remains. And another predator, another collectivist will move right into the spot. And as we know, tyrants have been overthrown throughout history at great cost of treasure and blood. We get rid of this one tyrant, and lo and behold, we find out a few years later we got a new one in there that's just as bad, if not worse, than the one we fought to get rid of. That's because people have been focusing on personalities. They think good guys versus bad guys instead of the system, that magnet that is underneath that attracts the predator class. And so in Freedom Force, we have made that issue very clear. That's step number one.
Well, Ed, it sure seems that you're touching on a lot of subjects that our founding fathers really laid out for us. I mean, they told us what to expect. They told us what was going to transpire. And, it's just people refuse to crack books that our founding fathers foretold this in.
Yeah, there were a lot of that. There was a lot of that. And when you analyze the Constitution of the United States, the principles of individualism are everywhere in that. It wasn't called that. Nobody was using that word, at least not in the colonies. They weren't at that time. But when you look at the Constitution, it is the embodiment of the ideology of individualism. So anyway, back to the issue of what is Freedom Force. Freedom Force is a group of people that's very clear on this issue. They know what they want. And that has been summarized in what we call the Creed of Freedom. So that's step number one. It makes it different. We know what we want. We know what we believe in. We are a firm believer of the concept that if you don't believe in something, you're going to fall for anything. So that's step number one. And the second step is, now what are we going to do about this thing now that we believe in something? And that leads us to the strategy of how do we recapture control over our own social and political systems? How do we come to power, in other words? We've lost control. We've lost power. Now the tactical question is, we can't just talk about it. We can't just have a philosophy that says it should be this way. It'd be better if we did that. We have to now have a strategy to actually come to power and make these things happen. So those are the two things about Freedom Force that people find irresistible. And I would urge anybody that wants to make a difference in the world and really bring about true reform to come to our website and give it a serious look. And that website is freedomforceinternational.org.
All right, Edward. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We have just a couple minutes left. I actually have a question coming out of the chat room from one of the station's producers that I want to ask you real quick, and then I want you to be able to give out any sort of, where people can get your book, if you have any Facebook, Twitter, anywhere else they can get more information on your work and what you're doing. One of the producers had caught you on the Glenn Beck show, and he felt that you might have been a little censored there, and you may not have been able to get your communications across to the audience as well. He just wanted to know, did you feel like you could really speak like you wanted to there on that show?
Well, I've been on the Glenn Beck show twice, and what can I say? Glenn Beck is Glenn Beck, and it's his show, and he's entitled to dominate it, which he does. And however, I felt very grateful to be on the show because it meant that I had a huge listening, or in this case, a viewing audience. And I was able to get my points across. And it was especially gratifying to know that when Glenn was talking and getting his points across, I knew that he had gotten those points from my book.
Gotcha. All right. Well, again, we can't thank you enough. You've been a huge influence on my awakening and the work that I do. And just you're one of the good guys in my book. You're one of our national heroes. So please keep doing what you're doing. Again, give out your website, give out where people can get your books and where they can get more information for you about you.
Okay, thanks again for that. The think tank site where we talk about these issues and solutions is freedomforceinternational.org. We have nothing to sell there except ideas. Now, if you want to get hold of some of the materials, the books and recordings, my book, for example, among others, we have about 100 of them there. Then our commercial site is called Reality Zone. So that's realityzone.com.
And we'll be sure we're going to be putting together a video of this interview. We'll be sure to put those links into the article that will go along with that as well. So.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, guys, you're doing a great job. Keep up the fight.
Thanks, Ed. Really appreciate you coming on. Have a great night.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye.